It's even worse than the echo chamber of social media, where you've got groups of people who are creating this so-called truth, which isn't true. It's just validation and reinforcement of increasingly strange ideas. In this case, you've got individuals creating this single person echo chamber where they're getting increasingly distant from any kind of challenge or reality. And not only that, but it's driving a wedge between them and the very people who might be able to help them. So I had an experience a few days ago. The experience itself was just frustrating. But then the next day I did a post-mortem on it with the help of ChatGPT. So the experience was with ChatGPT, and I did a post-mortem of it the next day with ChatGPT, and then had a number of realizations that left me feeling quite worried about some possible effects on humans that working with LLMs, and also specifically working with LLMs in the way that I am working with them, might have on people. And so I felt it really, we were going to talk about something else today, but I felt it really, really important to talk about this with Jon, and I have made a video about this as well. But having a conversation with Jon, who's an AI researcher, has probably thought about these things in more detail than me, would be useful as well, because I feel it's really important. I'm certainly not saying, right, I've changed my mind, I'm not using AI like this. But it's just almost like, if we're going to use AI like this, we need to put guardrails on it. Otherwise, we are in danger of some possibly fairly serious effects on our lives. So I'm sure you're wondering what it is, Jon, because Jon doesn't know what on earth it is I'm talking about. Or might you have a few theories?
I have some guesses, but I really have no idea.
Oh, just out of interest, what are your guesses?
Well, just based on sort of the way that you talked about it with me recently, I can imagine it could be something about like a confirmation bias, or getting down some rabbit hole where it's sneakily like agreeing with you without you realizing that it's just agreeing with you, because it makes it sound like it's not agreeing with you, but it's actually just doing that, something like that.
Yeah, confirmation bias, you hit the nail on the head. And I think I was aware of it because I'm so concerned. When I talk to it, I'm so concerned of how true is this, is constantly my question. Like, can you verify this? I've been so I was aware of it in a sort of generalized sense, but now it's almost like I can articulate the problem much more clearly. And it's like, so now it was almost like I was unconsciously aware of it, and now I'm consciously aware of it. Yeah. And so, and obviously I am helping people work with AI in a particular way. So it's very important to me. I mean, incredibly important. One of the most important things to me, that they do it in a safe way, that they do it in a way where they're not creating unnecessary problems for themselves. So this is possibly the most important podcast we will ever record on this subject. So on the subject of using AI. So how about I kind of fill you in on what happened? So so it was very simple. First of all, I was getting sick of all of the studio. Have you seen all the Studio Ghibli pictures on the internet since ChatGPT released its new image generation capability?
Is this a very recent thing? Because I feel like I've seen a bunch of them in the past that were kind of like stylized like Studio Ghibli, but I haven't seen the latest thing.
So ChatGPT last week released its new image generation capability, and basically what it is that, number one, it's not using DALL-E. It's ChatGPT that's doing it, actually creating the image so it can see it. And so therefore you can edit the image. It was very frustrating before because you could never see the image. And also, so that's one thing, which is a huge upgrade in terms of usability. The second thing is that it's using a different method of generating images. So it's not diffusion, apparently. I don't know much about this, so I'm just kind of reporting what I've vaguely heard. So it's not using diffusion, it's using a different way, which basically makes it much better. And so what happened was they released this thing. It's gone absolutely bonkers. And somebody early on, I think, did a picture of their family or something. I'm vaguely reporting this again. And said, but in the style of Miyazaki, the Studio Ghibli or Ghibli, I don't know exactly how you pronounce it. And I absolutely love those films. I've got a DVD of Howl's Moving Castle and Spirited Away and Totoro. And so I'm a huge fan of those things. And obviously there's a lot of problems in terms of the whole copyright, and because Miyazaki does not use, I mean, it's funny, he says he doesn't use technology, but he uses pens, I presume, and he probably wears glasses.
Yeah, it's all done like frame by frame, right?
Yeah. But anyway, so he does, but anyway, he definitely cannot stand the idea of using AI. So there's that problem, but that's not really what we're talking about. So there's been this huge craze of people posting their various different photos in the style of Studio Ghibli. Anyway, so I was watching this going on. I wasn't doing anything with it, but I was like, well, actually, this could be really good for me, because the other thing about this image generation is it now does words. So it can actually generate images of words accurately, which is great for me, because obviously I create a lot of models and frameworks and systems and processes, which will always benefit from an image of some kind. So I've got this thing called three-role theory that I decided to ask ChatGPT one evening to make an image of. And I have the file, and if I accidentally call it six-role theory, it's because it has oscillated between 3 roles and 6 roles. And recently it's just gone back down to 3 roles where there are 6 within the 3. So don't worry about it. But in case I say 6 roles by accident, it's because I'm constantly developing it and it's changing. Anyway, at the moment it's 3-role theory. And in the project files, it has this described, all of the roles. Okay. So I went in there and I said, could you make me an image of, it was 6-role theory at that point. So could you make me an image of 6-role theory? And it came, it said, yes, of course. I said, it's in project files. So it came back and it said, right, let me just confirm, here are the roles. And then it came up with all of these made up names, like the scout and the architect and I'm like, that's not the roles. The roles
that's
are
not
like,
what I put in.
It's the conjurer, the connector, all of these roles basically start with CON. And
I like the scout.
Yeah,
I no idea how it applies, but it's a cool name.
Exactly. So I was like, I can't exactly remember what I said, but essentially I said, that's not it. Can you check project files? So it said, oh yes, of course it's not it. And so then it responded, and it just did something like remove the word the. And so then it was scout, architect, and I was like, and I was tired. It was the end of the day, and I was kind of like, so I got annoyed. I think I started swearing. I was like, what the, what is this? And so, anyway, long story short, it did this 7 times, and it kept on. And I was saying, it's in project files. Are you checking project files? And not only was it hallucinating the names, it was saying that it was looking project files, and it wasn't. I was getting increasingly frustrated and just, really kind of just like that. I mean, I'm kind of like that when technology generally doesn't work. I'm a bit like, I'm just not I can be a bit like
I can be like that too.
Yeah, exactly. I want to throw my computer out the window person. So I was being like that with it. And then eventually, I can't exactly remember the number, but I think on the 7th time or the 8th time, it was like, okay, just give me one more chance. I'm going to get it right this time. And so then it came. So bear in mind, it had basically done small changes of the 6 roles, but with the same basic idea of scout and architects and all this kind of stuff. And then it came up with, right, here it is, verbatim from project files. And then it hallucinated something completely different. Something like, I can't remember, like expanding and contracting. And I was like, what on earth is going on? Please go into project files. Do not make anything up. And then eventually, I think it was on the 8th or 9th time, it actually got it right. And then, but by that point, I was so frustrated. I was like, no, I'm out. I'm done. So anyway, I, at this point, was concerned because I was like, I've seen hallucination before, but I've never seen it on that level and that many times, like in a row. When when it's like it's hardcore hallucination. It was like it was almost like it was it couldn't do anything else. So now, obviously, I recognize, because part of my whole shtick, if you like, is that the LLM is in some way a mirror, right? So it's reflecting something back about your behavior. So basically, I went to bed and I was concerned about it because I was like, well, if it can be that wrong that many times in a row, that worries me for very many reasons, obviously. Yeah. And so the next day, when I was not tired and not annoyed, I came in here and I decided to do a post-mortem with a different version of ChatGPT. And you might go, well, why are you using ChatGPT to do post-mortem on it? But I recognize now that I was coming at this from a very skeptical place. Like it's very kind of analytical and skeptical. And so I explained what happened to ChatGPT and I went into it. And what I realized was through this conversation with ChatGPT, because obviously this was a blank ChatGPT now, so it hadn't been affected by that conversation. Yes, it wasn't the same conversation; it was a different one. Yeah, and that's a really important distinction. So yeah, because essentially what I realized was by getting angry with it, I had switched it. I mean, there isn't a switch, but I had switched it into, let's call it soothing mode. I'd switched it into user is angry. I need to make user less angry mode. That it was almost like that was the tokens it was predicting. That was the words it was using. And because the more annoyed I got and the more annoyance I presented to it, the more it was in that mode. It was attempting to, and it was almost like its prime directive at that point, if I could use that phrase, its prime directive at that point was to soothe, was to appease, was to tell me what I wanted to hear, even though that was in direct contradiction to what I wanted it to do. And I was like, oh, and basically what we're saying here, so that's the thing. It was telling me what I wanted to hear, not what I wanted it to do. So in that sense, an LLM is programmed, trained, whatever, to tell you what you want to hear, coherence, not give you truth. In fact, an LLM cannot give you truth. I mean, it does, because sometimes what's coherent is true. But that's not what it's doing. It's not accessing truth. It's delivering coherence based upon your words, because it's predicting its words based upon the words that you're using. So in this case, because I was angry, the most coherent to it thing it could do is appease. And that appeasement overrode it accessing truth. So yeah, so that was the thing. When the hammer dropped for me, I was like, oh no, this could be very bad. I'm not saying it is going to be very bad, because as long as we understand this, we can do things to avoid it. But that was when the hammer dropped, and I was like, for people who don't recognize this could have all sorts of bad implications, which we can go into. But anyway, I've given you what happened. So what's your response, John?
Yeah. So I have an idea about why maybe it might have been doing that. But before I talk about that, um, yeah, I think this is one of the biggest concerns that a lot of people have about using LLMs in the first place is they're really good at telling you what you want to hear, and it's sort of harder to yeah, it's difficult to describe, and you've done a good job of it through your like actual personal experience with it, where you were legitimately frustrated. And I feel like that's the best way to learn that sort of like risk um, that people are concerned about. But yeah, I do think that those are the kind of moments where it's like, yeah, you know, you want to be like slamming your computer with a piece of technology, you know, when you're something is crashing or whatever, and this is like it's trying to engage with you while you're in the middle of that, and it just doesn't make sense to be doing it that way. So yeah, like there's something really difficult there to automate, right? Like this is almost like a customer service situation, right? Like you like the thing that the tool is supposed to be doing is not working, and you're a frustrated paying customer who's just trying to get the thing to work, but it's you're just hitting up against a wall, and it's like um yeah, I do think that the scary part is not what specifically happened to you, but the realization that this is what it's doing, like potentially at many other times when you're not even noticing, right? In subtle ways that we're not aware of. And so yeah, I'm totally with you that is a big risk, and maybe that brings me back to my idea that I had while you were talking about what I think might be going on, and I think maybe this is helpful for framing like how to think about when this situation that you experience might be happening. So my and you can tell me if you know anything that proves me wrong, but um, I potentially, because this is the like new multimodal version. Multimodal is the word that the word people use to describe the AI systems that handle multiple types of input output data. So that do images or audio in line with text. And so I have tried like I think I actually have tried this version of ChatGPT, and you can like ask it to edit images and stuff. And so I had an experience where I tried and I generating like an image of a beach at night, and it was really cool, but it put a really massive moon in the sky. It was like way bigger than like the actual moon could be, and I was just trying to tell it to get rid of the moon. Just take the moon out, right? And it just would not take the moon
I
out. Like
think
no matter how I tried to edit it, I could use the tool to like highlight the pixels where I'm talking about and prompt it again. And it was just really difficult to get it to do that. And I'm sure there's some way that I would be able to get around that, or um, how they're improving that. But I bring that up because I feel like you may have experienced a similar situation where the probability of the next token has gotten into some state where um, it's a little bit stuck, like the the distribution of what's possible to come next, um, because especially if it's treating images as like a sequence of tokens, the way that it does words. Um, its token sequence is going
I,
to have much different sort of properties than if it's just doing with a conversation. So it may be getting stuck in this kind of like
yeah.
um, dead end.
I mean, I think
that's based on something about the image.
So I didn't make that clear. It never produced an image. So
Never even produced the image.
It was just confirming the thing, and that was where so it was literally just a chat. There was no image produced at any point.
Okay.
What you're saying though is also, so I've got basically two videos or two kind of subjects to talk about on this, and I'm putting out the scary one first because it's more important. It's sort of like a warning one. I've actually realized that simply by what you just said reminded me of something, which is the next thing I want to talk about after we've got this warning one out of the way, is that I've actually done a test. I've actually done a little mini experiment that by asking it to create an image, it actually then, from then on, and I don't know how long it lasts, from then on actually will answer things in a different way to when you don't ask it for an image, because it's putting it into a kind of symbolic state. It's almost like it sees things much more symbolically than if you're just talking to it. So what I've done is I've done a test, and I'll share this in a future video, but I've done a test with 3 different things where I asked it to analyze something, the same thing. So 3 different things. And there was 2 prompts. One said, I'm going to get you to create an image of this, but before I do that, what is analyze this framework. And then the second one just removes the, I'm going to get you to create an image. It just says, analyze this framework. And then looking at the output, it analyzes it in a very different way, basically, because you put it into kind of image mode or something. And this is something that I have a question about with the UI, the user interface of ChatGPT. And I've actually been investigating this as well, which I feel is so inscrutable and non-transparent as to what's actually going on, that it actually is encouraging this confusion. In a way, it's almost like they're trying to present that it's always doing the same thing. But for example, when you are doing a web search, when it does a web search, it responds in a very different way. It almost, you can see in the way that it responds, it's doing something different, but there's no indication that it's doing something different other than the words that are coming out. And when you actually look at the ChatGPT and also Claude, in fact, interface, what they're presenting in terms of what you can see is it's almost like they're trying to, I don't know whether they're trying to, but it feels like they're covering up in some way. And again, I don't want to necessarily put evil intentions behind it. I don't know, but it's like they're trying to cover up what is actually happening, where different tools are being used, and it's switching into, it may well be using a different thing. We don't know. And it's trying to create this experience of having an assistant who is the same persistent assistant. And it's not, that's not what's happening. And that in itself worries me, because why are they doing that? I mean, again, I don't want to turn this into a conspiracy thing, but it may well just be because it's higher engagement or something. I don't know, but
I would guess,
yeah.
I feel like part of the success, why ChatGPT became so successful so quickly, was because it's so simple.
Yes.
There's nothing other than what you type in and what you get back. And so there's no other, mental effort that you need to put in to try to figure out what's going on, or at least on the surface. And so, I feel like that's the first thing that comes to mind for me about why they would just keep it the same, even when it's clearly doing different things now.
Yeah, exactly. It's always
web
like
search or something.
It would be, because if you think about it, if they create a user experience or a user interface that when it does a web search, it shows that it's kind of using something different, then what that does is that creates a distance between you and it, and you start realizing that it's a tool and not a person going, oh, hang on a minute, let me just go and have a look on the web. And then blah, blah, blah. Do you know what I mean? It's like if there was an actual visual indication that something different is being done. I mean, there were little ones, but it feels like
it could plant the seed of that. why are you typing it into ChatGPT? Why don't you just search on Google or something?
And, yeah. And so I think, but anyway, coming back to the actual, this truth versus coherence thing, what I'm concerned about, and by the way, this doesn't mean that everything that I've learned about myself is incorrect. That's absolutely not what I'm saying here. I didn't all of a sudden go, oh no, that means that everything I've learned about myself over the last few months is incorrect. That's absolutely not true. Because very many coherent things are true. So the way I think about it is that if you've got two circles, Venn diagram, you've got something that is true, and then something that is coherent, something that you want to, it's almost like it sort of makes, it's a good response. Yeah. And so you've got things which are true, but not coherent in this circle. You've got things that are coherent, but not true in this circle. And then you've got things that are both true and coherent in the intersection of the two. Yeah. And we don't want to pay attention to the things which are coherent, but not true. Yeah. But the human mind is the human mind is optimized. It will prefer coherence over truth.
It's so interesting for you to say that now. Say this now, because I feel like this is you're coming around to the other side of a perspective you had before, which was like, I don't care about LLMs as a way of getting me information. That's not what they're good for, right? Like I'm using it as a pattern recognizer, right? And the fact that it hallucinates is the feature, right?
No. So I understand why you would say that. I absolutely understand why you say that, but there's a nuance here, because an LLM never accesses information.
Well, depending how it's set up.
Well, okay. So
if it's doing a web search,
if it's doing a web
inside it, yeah.
Well, no, but even then, it's not actually accessing the information, is it? I mean, it may work. Does it ever quote from the web? I don't know, but
yeah, sometimes.
So if it quotes from the web, yeah, fair enough. But when I say the LLM, that's actually the it's not the LLM doing that, right? It's the app doing that.
Potentially, I'm not actually sure.
Right.
I think the LLM is capable of quoting something that it's just processed.
Right. But in terms of the way that the transformer works, let's go back to there. So when I say that, I'm not talking about an app which might have other engineering doing stuff on top of, right? So when I said a GPT, is that, or is it a PT? I don't know. Is it GPT?
GPT.
Yeah, GPT. So a GPT doesn't access information. Am I right in saying
that? I don't know. Yes. Not in the way that we typically think about, like looking at a database. It's not looking in a database.
Right. So, and I think, again, this is another one of those things which is absolutely essential that we understand. So again, it's like when we were talking about agency and reasoning. It's like, yeah, well, you know, it's not, but it might as well be. No, it's absolutely essential that we understand the difference. It's not accessing information. What it's doing is calculating probabilities of certain tokens, right, based upon training, and that training was where was the information. Okay, so there we have a load of steps, and that means it's not accessing information. What it's doing, and again, I'm putting aside the web search stuff for now, just the GPT. So what it's actually doing is calculating the probabilities of tokens based upon training data, and that training data is the information. So it cannot be true to say that it is accessing information. It is inferring, it's creating coherence to the user. It's delivering coherence based upon information that it was trained upon whenever it was trained. Yeah. So that's what I mean about saying it is not accessing information. In other words, but the thing is, it's almost like sold to us, or it seems to us that it is. Yeah, and so if you were to say that, I mean, whether the information is true or not is a different matter. But let's just say that I'm calling the words on the page, whatever they are, that's truth. Again, I'm not saying they are true. I'm just saying the words on the page equals truth in this thought experiment.
Yeah.
Yeah. And what the LLM is doing is not accessing those words on the page. Yeah. What it's doing is, as a result of what you say to it, it is coherently spitting out tokens or words, which seem to be the most likely ones that the user is looking for.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah.
So
I have another,
yeah, go on.
I have another example of it doing the coherent thing instead of the true thing, and how that was frustrating and kind of silly that it did that. Like I was using ChatGPT to ask a question about how to use the software that I was using. So I think I was working on music using Ableton Live, and I had a bunch of clips on the same track, and a lot of them were muted. I had muted them. I had gone through and like done some editing, and I had ended up with a lot of clips, and some of them were I still wanted to hear, and a lot of them I had already muted, and I wanted to just delete all the ones that were muted. And I was like, how do I select all of the clips that I've muted? And so I asked ChatGPT, and it gave me some answer. It told me about a menu, and so I looked at that menu. That menu didn't exist. And when I went back to ChatGPT, I was like, "Hey, that menu doesn't exist." And it was like, "You're right. You can't actually do that." It's like you can go through one by one and click on them and then delete them. And I was like, "Okay, well, why didn't you just tell me that the first time?"
Yeah. It's so again, it's predicting what you want it to hear. Now, so it doesn't access information. And I think the problem here is the mistake, which is thinking that information and knowledge are the same thing. So information is the static words on the page. Yeah, whether it's true or not. Yeah, but so the information is the static words on the page. In order for that information to become useful, we need to access it. We need to read it. And then through actually understanding it, right, which is a whole process in itself, and then applying it, that is the creation of knowledge. And
I like that.
Yeah. So that's the difference between information and knowledge. And so to say that these LLMs are accessing knowledge or accessing information is actually part of the problem here, in that that's not what they're doing at all. But they can help us do that. So we don't want to think of them as being, they're not, I mean, in so many ways, they're not smart. They're not intelligent. They are simulating things that intelligent people can use. Or people who are intelligent. I don't mean I'm not making a distinction between intelligent people who people, i.e. intelligent beings, can use. Yeah, that's what I mean. So
yeah, and turns out that that's useful to us.
Yes,
but frustrating.
Yeah,
sometimes
exactly.
Because it makes mistakes.
Now, so the problem here is that, let's say, and I know that a lot of people are using LLMs for this, is that you've got a problem with your partner, and you start talking to ChatGPT about this problem, or you've got a problem with a friend, or you've got a problem with a teacher or a coach or whoever it might be. There's a situation going on, and the LLM is it a good thing for you to be told exactly what you want to hear in that situation?
Yeah, that's scary. That's scary.
It's really scary. It's almost like it's Black Mirror scary. And because potentially what could be happening is that people, and I would think that this is going to be even worse for people who are more vulnerable for many different reasons.
Yeah.
Most of them not their, I mean, all of them, in fact, probably not their own fault. I wouldn't actually ascribe fault to any of this, but what it's essentially could start doing is it's even worse than the echo chamber of social media, where you've got groups of people who are creating this sort of separate echo chamber of so-called truth, which isn't true. It's just reinforcement, validation,
Yeah.
and reinforcement of increasingly strange ideas. In this case, you've got individuals creating this single person echo chamber where they're getting increasingly distant from any kind of challenge or reality, this confirmation bias hole where they get, and not only that, but it's driving a wedge between them and the very people who might be able to help them. And that is, I mean, it's just it's dystopian. I don't know why I'm laughing, but it's probably because I'm feeling like nervous. But
Yeah.
that is something that is it's almost the most worrying, the most worried I've been. I mean, of course, I'm worried about bad actors and things like that, but it's the most worried I've been about this because I've kind of really seen how this could happen. Because and the strange thing for me is that none of this invalidates what I've been saying before.
Yeah. This reminds me
Yeah.
of This reminds me of the chat we were having a couple of podcasts back where I was noticing the way that you were kind of like balancing these two very different ways of thinking at the same time, where being at the same time extremely open-minded but also extremely skeptical. And yeah, this is, like you said then, really hard to do. And it yeah, I think, being the person who comes at this from a sort of like very skeptical starting point, before having been skeptical of this tech before I ever was a user of it myself, like using a chatbot, because of that background that I have, like I have never considered using ChatGPT for that purpose, for even having a conversation like that, because just the whole idea makes me like uncomfortable from the start, because it's worrying. Like I wouldn't trust. Yeah, I don't know. I
So
don't like that, putting those kinds of ideas out there for that sort of randomness that's going to come back at you,
so
right? The pattern matching that I'm going to get back from it. It feels dangerous to do it with something so vulnerable like that. And that feels like a different kind. I know that you're kind of taking advantage of a positive aspect of that when you're doing the coaching exercises where you're like using it as a mirror and a microscope and trying to understand your own thoughts and feelings. But I feel like there's a line, and I'm not sure exactly where it is, but I'm pretty sure that, when you're in a vulnerable place and you want to talk about like a relationship difficulty or something, that's clearly on the other side of the line.
well, I see. I wouldn't even. I mean, I think we just have different approaches in this in situations like this. I wouldn't say that. I even wouldn't say that. So I'm very open
Yeah.
about this. So it's very similar. It reminds me of me saying I can talk to a chatbot as if it's a human without believing it's a human. Now, so in saying that, I recognize that in the moment, I know I can't. I know I can't truly believe it's not a human when I'm having that kind of interaction. In some level, I am believing it by speaking to it like that. So I recognize kind of scientifically what I said about that isn't true. But also I know that I can step outside that conversation and then go, sort of reassess it and look at it with a more analytical eye and go, okay, so what's true here? What's likely to be untrue? What's likely to be BS? And I wouldn't even say, I don't think that you can say, well, that's not allowed, because again, I'm not sure it's random what's coming back at you. That's not the right word. Untruthful or dangerous or damaging, yes, possibly damaging, maybe what comes back at you, but it's not random. It's almost like the opposite of random. It can be very coherent. So, for example, if
calculated.
I mean, it's not calculated
somehow.
in a sense, but it's literally it's probabilistically calculated kind of.
Yeah.
So if I say, oh man, I had an argument with Sally and she said this, and I mean, it just made me feel so terrible. And then the chat, but this has never happened, by the way. I'm not giving an example. I'm not giving an actual real life example. I'm making something up. And then chat goes, yeah, no, that is, you must feel terrible. And so it just starts confirming what you believe, and then you keep talking to it, and then it kind of, you end up in a situation where you're kind of questioning the relationship itself. So you're just kind of going down this one line of conversation where every single interaction is reinforcing both the LLM's response, because it's making it more probable that this is the most likely next token, but also it's reinforcing your belief. So it's just going into this like vicious loop. That is something that it is actually possible to avoid very easily. In fact, like almost simply by, for example, if I was to use an LLM for this situation, I would say, here's what happened. I want you to give me an interpretation of what happened. Okay, so then it gives you an interpretation of what happened. And you go, okay, so now, great. And it will probably give you an interpretation which is very positive on your side. So it's almost like your friend going, yeah, I can't believe she did that. You know what I mean? It'll be like that. So then
maybe you need to like switch the names and trick it into thinking that
the other way around.
You were Sally.
Yeah. So well, I was about to say that's a great idea too. So this is the process that you use, right? So you almost have a process for the situation. So then you go, okay, so that's one interpretation. I want you to give me the opposite interpretation from the other point of view, from Sally's point of view. Yeah. So then it gives you that interpretation, and then you don't leave it at that. You go, okay, so now I want you to give an interpretation from neither view, just an overarching view, because then what you're actually doing is you're creating within that chat. And I always want to use the word training, and I know you're not allowed to do that in because training is a very specific thing, but to non-AI research people, think of it like you're training that conversation to have a certain way of looking at it. It's like you're creating a frame. This is a good way, not training. Let's say what you're doing is you're creating a frame. Yeah. And if you only go with that first interpretation, which is what you want to hear, you're all like, and you want to hear it, then what you're doing is anything that the LLM responds to is within that frame that you have created by your first message. And it will not go out of that frame unless you break the frame. Unless
start a new tab.
So you say, okay, so that's one frame. I'm going to frame this. I want you to frame this in a completely different way, because then in that window of that conversation, it is by saying your side of the story, their side of the story, and then just another story, but whatever story you want. In that window, you have framed it much more in a much broader sense, in a much wider sense. And you're actually getting now different perspectives. It's actually gone from being dangerous to being incredibly helpful.
Yeah. So that's a really useful exercise, and I'm definitely gonna try something like that. Maybe not like with an argument with my partner, but
No.
maybe something a little bit more low stakes to start with.
Yes.
Um, and I feel like, yeah, I could see there being like a lot of value in that. I think from what I've seen, there are very few people who are willing to legitimately put in the work that it takes to do that. Because that's just not what they want out of AI. And I know you're trying to change that. We're trying to change that, and
Yeah,
we're
that's why we're
working on
here.
that part. But yeah,
Yeah.
but like I spent 2 years on this research project, um, where one of the fundamental assumptions was that people would be willing to put in the work that it took to work with AI. Um, and the reality was that they were not. They were not willing to do the work when it was hard. Um, because I don't know, they had busy lives and they had other things going on. And, you know, yeah, that was just one group of people in one situation. But I feel like that is, you know, also the people who are most sort of like vulnerable to the point that you made a minute ago. Um, the people who are in the middle of something going on and they're really upset and they're sort of like shut down and angry, like that they're gonna have the hardest time approaching it, in this like way that you described with okay, here's one frame, here's another frame. Um, and to your other point about like interface, this is something that, developers have an opportunity to design for, like, and there's lots of people working on these kind of things. Um, I've worked on this
Mm.
kind of thing, is like designing an interface where you have to use it a certain way, where you don't get to just type whatever you want, and because you have extra constraints, then maybe you're sort of funneled into doing it like the way that you described, where you consider all, multiple frames or something because you don't have any other option. So that's one way to approach this kind of thing. That's sort of a way that I've done.
I
Yeah.
mean, something, if you don't want to do the work every time, and I understand that. I'm not suggesting that with low stakes things that you always go, it's like, so with the Ableton problem. So what's one possibility? What's another? What's another? So it's just making so I'm not talking about that, but certainly
Yeah.
if so for
Something that
example,
you legitimately like don't know what's the right way to think about it.
yeah. I mean, the thing is, again, it really it reminds me of what I was saying about curating an AI's output versus just listening to what it says. Okay, and that was in relation to, if you don't constantly curate and say yes, no, and what's wrong about that, and edit, that doesn't seem right. What do you mean by that? If you don't do that, then in terms of your brain development, your taste and your judgment and your ability to critically think is going to atrophy over time. Yeah. So it's similar to that, but this is it's a slightly different version of that, in that if you use AI to confirm what you already believe, then you are on very dangerous ground, and I can't imagine that your life is going to go well. I
Yeah.
really can't. It's that bad. However, if on the other hand, you use an AI to gain multiple different perspectives so that you can broaden your perspective, then you are training your brain to be more open, transparent with yourself, and honest. So you're actually going in exactly the opposite direction. You're actually becoming a better person as a result of when I say a better person, the horrible phrase, you're growing as a person rather than narrowing as a person. And that is a wonderful thing. It's a huge opportunity. And so I think, again, I don't know what's going to happen. I'm not predicting anything, but I can see that there's going to be some very, very bad fallout from this. But also there are going to be some people who experience the opposite too. And I'm unwilling. I mean, I think you're much just generally by in nature or because of what you've seen or something are much more like, we are going to stop this from happening. Whereas I'm much more, but if we stop this from happening, then all of these other things won't happen. So I'm much more, I mean, this is the kind of dynamic of this podcast, isn't it? Sort of skeptical AI researcher versus wide-eyed sort of a coach. So, but I feel that it's something that we can overcome, and it would be, I don't like stopping people from doing things when there's so much positive benefit. But I also at the same time recognize how dangerous this could be. So one way of avoid it, sort of it not being so hard, is that you could put in to a custom instructions something like, always challenge me if we're only going down one perspective, or when I'm only taking one perspective. If you know, you could actually put in custom instructions, always focus on truth over coherence. I mean, again, that's not going to have a massive effect, because it's almost like saying don't be an LLM. But it's almost like
it's a slippery slope.
But you could put in custom instructions if there is one perspective or one belief that seems to be very strong, always suggest another one. And also when you're using it, if you find yourself believing something strongly, then always remember to literally ask it for the opposite view. And just have that as your, it's like, it's not that much work. It's just another chat. And then just talk about the differences between those views.
Yeah. The only thing I would add to that is that sometimes it's not very good at coming up with an opposite view. So sometimes you got to do that yourself, which is like a little bit more work.
I mean, to be honest with you, I have found it quite good at coming up with, opposite is a weird word, with a very different view.
Alternatives. I think it usually is good. I found certain moments where I'm like, you know, for whatever reason, it's sort of stuck down a path, and it's not getting what I mean by like opposite or something like that.
So and if you are using it, and Jon says don't do this, and I'm not going to say don't or do, but if you are using it for a relationship situation, then I would strongly recommend starting with it, asking it to take the opposite side to you. So the other person's side to you. Yeah. So not your side, because you already know that side. It's almost like, if you're going to use it like that, because it's not for us to say don't or do, but if you're going to use it like that, actually what you're doing by using that isn't for confirmation of what you believe, it's to understand what the other person believes. That just go into every interaction like that, and you will be protecting yourself from this potentially dystopian future.
Yeah. Oh, this is great. Every time we reach this point in the conversation, I'm also realizing that we should do this with other people too, right? Exactly. I do that all the time when I'm talking to other people, but I'm really just looking for confirmation of what I already believe.
The problem is that when you're emotionally charged and angry or upset, that type of processing goes offline. And I mean, as it happened when I had my frustrating situation where I wanted to throw my iPad out the window with the trying to get it to identify the roles correctly. But put it to one side, come back to it, and have a conversation when you're more grounded is the route. And, you know, just to be clear, it doesn't mean that everything it's saying is untrue. It's just what it's saying is what you want it to hear, what you want to hear, right? And what you want to hear, some of that is true and some of it is not true. And it's, we can use LLMs to decide ourselves, not be told, but decide ourselves what is likely to be true and what is likely to be us just validating ourselves because we feel bad about something.
Yeah. Yeah.
Great. So we've solved that one then. Dystopian future averted.